got Sarah Humphreys with us today, and she's a consultant in New South Wales on inclusive education. And we're very excited to have her here today to be sharing with us around individual learning plans, so or PPs or whatever we're going to call them. But yes, thank you very much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to with what you've got to share. I wished I had this information when our son started school many years ago. So I'm really excited that we've got some families here that have got young children that will be learning this and use this methodology to get some good things happening for their kids in education. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Sarah.
So I really, having spoken to Jan, wanted to make this a practical session for parents that's going to give you some hints and tips about what really makes a good ILP, individual learning plan, or personalized plan, or, you know, in some states it's a negotiated education plan. Doesn't really matter what it's called, but I think it's helpful for us to understand what it's meant to be and how we can ensure you've got a good plan for your child. And I thought I'd break my presentation up into 4 steps. And a really key message that I want to get across today is that the ILP isn't just a one-step process. There are lots of points at which you should be talking about the plan, looking at the plan, reviewing the plan, coming back to the plan. And hopefully by setting it out like this, that will help explain that for you. So first of all, we'll just briefly look at what's the purpose of an ILP, and some of the indicators of what makes it a good one, and some of the indicators of what makes it not such a good one. You might have some insights into that yourself already. And I'm very happy for you to interrupt me at any point during the presentation as well. The next thing we'll look at is preparing for an ILP meeting. So I know that's going to be very topical for some of you today, and some tips and strategies for going into the meeting and feeling confident and prepared. The next step, we'll look at the process of the ILP meeting itself. And this one is really about focusing on good collaboration and promoting you as an expert in the meeting. I'm really keen for you to feel as the parent you are an expert in your child. And then the last step in the process is putting it all into practice. So it's really important that these ILPs don't get written and then filed away. So there's some strategies at the end in terms of how we can keep them dynamic and being used continually. I've also put some cartoons throughout the whole presentation from Professor Michael Giangreco from the University of Vermont, and the illustrations are done by Kevin Ruel from Petrel Publications Incorporated. And you might be familiar with these, but I think that a little bit of humour and might also capture some of the frustrations that you feel along the way. Let's have a look at the image first of all. You may have seen this one before. And what we're aiming for in these 3 images, the first box is saying that a one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to work for kids in schools, because we know we've got a range of needs and students are going to need different supports in order to help them achieve the same goal. So if you look at the second image, you can see that some supports have been put in place. One of the children has 1 box to stand on so they can see the baseball game. Another has 2 boxes. So this is typically what we would be wanting to see our ILPs outlining. What are the supports your child needs in order to be able to achieve the same goal as the rest of the class? And then the third box is really taking it to the next level and thinking, can we design a lesson for all of our learners where we don't need to put any additional supports in place because the lesson has been designed to meet a variety of needs? And there's nothing wrong with box 2 or box 3, but those are the spaces, particularly the third space is the area that I like to work in. And I'll give you some examples of that later on. So please interrupt me if you want to, but I'll just read through the dot points I've put here. So these are some of the indicators that I think are really important for you in terms of, what's going to make a good ILP. It really is a plan. and it's been agreed between your child, you as parents and carers, the school, and sometimes other professionals will be involved as well, maybe a psychologist, a therapist. So it's input from everybody, and it's an agreed plan of support. As a document, it's a record of what everyone has agreed on what your child, the goals your child is going to be working towards. The ILP also provides an opportunity for discussion around what the barriers are that your child is experiencing with their learning. So if we look back at that image on the left, the barrier in the first image is the wooden fence. Not all of the children can see over the top of it. So the barrier is removed by putting supports in place, either boxes to stand on or a fence that you can see through. And I put a note at the bottom here, and this is so important, and carry this with you into any discussion you have with your schools, is that barriers to learning are in the environment and never within your child. So if they're having trouble with their learning, what is it in that learning environment that's making it difficult for them? Could it be the pace of the lesson? Could it be the amount of reading that's involved during a lesson that's causing the barrier? Could it be how relevant the topic is to their everyday life? Could it be the physical environment that is causing the barrier? And then the next step is to think about what are the adjustments that we put in place that will help support your child, remove those barriers and support your child to achieve their goals. And again, another tip or indicator of a good ILP is that the goals, what you're aiming for your child to achieve, should be in relation to the term or at the very most the year. Because if you have a plan with goals that are longer than that, you'll just drift. So you really need to have targeted goals that you can measure within that school year. And the next dot point I put in bold, and I think this really ties into something that somebody said just at the very beginning when you started to join in, that the ILP is a guide for your teachers in how they can remove barriers to learning or in their lesson and give access to the same learning opportunities as the rest of the class. So it is instructing them that if you apply this adjustment in your lesson, this is how your child is going to be, this student is going to be able to access the learning that you've got in your teaching program. And the last dot point here is so important. Your ILP is a mechanism for measuring progress. If there's no record of what you want success to look like and when you're going to measure it, it's just a piece of paper that's going to get filed away. There's no real purpose to it. And it's the mechanisms for measuring progress that are going to allow you to keep this document dynamic. Okay, hopefully everyone's okay with that page. So here is the list of Michael Giangreco's cartoons. Sorry, some of the images aren't as sharp as I would like them to have been here. Mrs. Snippet had long thought an IEP stood for incredibly excessive paperwork. No, it's an individual education program. And I think that's something to watch out for. An ILP should never be a novel, a volume. Certainly with some of the best plans that I've seen put into practice, they might be 1 or 2 pages long with maybe a maximum of 3 goals. And if it starts to get longer than that, you can lose sight of what the purpose of the plan is. And I know each system has their own way of pulling an ILP together. So ILPs will look different if you're in the Department of Education school or a Catholic school or an independent school. But if they're very, very long, that's a red flag. So it's really important if your plan is not a separate learning program from the rest of the class. It's not about giving your kids something different. It's about how they're going to access the same. So it's not a separate learning program. It's not a document that's filed away. It's not a list of goals repeated year after year. It is not something that cannot be changed. There's a double negative there. So basically saying once it's written, you can go back and change it. Don't feel that you're locked into that. It's not developed without your involvement. and it's not a one-step process. It's not just about the meeting and then that's it until next year. So hopefully those, what an ILP is and an ILP is not, is going to be helpful for you. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Normally the plans will have a spot for a signature on the bottom, and I think that'll probably, it might depend from sectors to sector.
Okay.
Yeah. But often there is a space to be signed. Many instances I've worked with families where they haven't signed the plan, but the plan still goes ahead. So that's something to check with your school or system. Okay, so preparing for the meeting, and I thought this is an opportunity for you to just share with me now how you're feeling, especially as we've got some people today who I know have got ILP meetings coming up. What can we do to help prepare you for the meeting so that you feel confident that you're going to be listened to, and that it's going to be a productive meeting, especially when you're often allocated an hour for a meeting. The cartoon on the left with Mr. Green, there's so much jargon that we use in education. You really don't need to study to find out what all of these terms mean, but you might have a set of questions you want to set up. Sometimes these ILP meetings can have a cast of thousands, and as a parent that can feel quite intimidating. The point of this slide, preparing for the ILP meeting, is really to give you the boost in confidence that you are going into that meeting as the expert in your child. And what Elise and Delang have both just shared about their own children is you really know your children and you know strategies that are going to be successful for them. So you can go in with confidence with that knowledge, and then I've got some ideas about how you might share that with the school to have a little bit more bang for your buck. So if we just focus on the left-hand side of the screen, first of all, as you're preparing for your ILP meetings, these are some questions to ask yourself and also to ask of your child. So I put your child first. What goal or goals does your child have for themselves? Now, often like students have a right to be, your children have the right to be a part of the ILP meeting, but often in reality, they're not there. If it's too much for them to attend the meeting, how can their voice be a part of that meeting? And having that conversation at home with your child about, what is it, where do they see themselves going for the end of the term, for the end of the year? What does your child want school to know about them? Because getting ready for these meetings, we've talked about the importance of building that positive relationship. Sometimes just a little insight into what your family is like, what you do, the way you like to do things can be a way in to start to build some understanding and some trust. So definitely have a chat with your child and think about how you might take that information to the meeting. And then the next part here, what's your vision for your child? And I know Jan does a lot of work around this. And I've broken this down into long-term goals, medium-term goals, and short-term goals. So you might, be having a think about what's your whole of life vision for your child. So that might be to hold down a full-time job. So that might be your whole of life vision. Then break it down into a medium-term goal. Well, what do you hope that they will achieve by the end of the year? And maybe that they will start to increase their independence with their writing, so they can write more independently by the end of the year. And then think about, well, what's that going to look like for a term? And at this point, don't beat yourself up about having to have all of the answers, because that short-term goal is what you can talk about with your teachers, because they're also the experts in the meeting. So you are an expert, they are an expert. That short-term goal, you can work that out together. And I've got some examples that will illustrate that. So it really is helpful for you to have that big picture view share that with the school, and so they can help you unpack, okay, what are the steps we need to build in place? What does your child need to learn in order that we can work towards achieving that goal? What do you want your child, what do you want the school to know about your child? Again, giving some insights, but also to start the meeting on a really positive note. What are the things that your child has done really well? Yeah, and that's a great example of finding a way for their voice to be heard, for them to be a part of the meeting. Yeah, whether they come in at the beginning, at the end, or you put a video together. So over on the right-hand side here, I've just put some sort of strategies for you to think about. So talk with your child. Make a list of things that you want to share at the meeting. When you get into a room and you've got a whole heap of other professionals there, and they've also got their own agenda and they're watching the clock, you might forget to share some of these positives. So make a list and take that into the meeting. Do a little video or with your child, or they might be able to make a video about themselves that can be shared. With therapy goals, I find it certainly with a teaching background, it can be really helpful if your therapist who's not able to attend the meeting is able to just write a brief summary of what they're working on and how that might relate to school. Just a quick insight. And then the last point there with the little clock logo, think about sharing this information before you go into the meeting. Time is always tight, and it may help to just give the other people who are going to be present some insight into what your expectations are. They've got time to mull over your long-term goals and have a think about some ideas or strategies for you to discuss at the meeting, rather than everything just being crammed into this 1 hour. So have a think about how you might like to share information before the meeting. And as I said before, you are the expert. You don't have to have all the answers. So moving on to the next part now, which is the process of the actual meeting itself. I've just put some key words in here in terms of what this meeting should look and feel like. It should feel like you've got a trusting relationship with the other people present. It should be about problem solving. So again, teachers also, they don't have to have all of the answers, but you've all got skills and expertise that you're pooling together, and you're brainstorming and coming up with a plan, a solution for your child that you're going to try out, gather some evidence, and then change if you need to. It does need to focus on strength. So that's why get all those positive stories in there first. I just want to tell you about something that went really well, or last term, or at home. And there should be a conversation around barriers. So barriers to learning. And don't forget, the barriers are always in the environment, never in your child. The goals that you talk about, there needs to be a way of measuring them. So the caption on the left here about a vague ILP goal around Mark will improve his communication skills. Well, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to measure that in term 4? How will you measure that transitioning into next year, in the first term of next year? So there needs to be a way of you measuring progress within a term or a year. It's really important that who is responsible is also part of the plan. You want to know that when the strategies have been identified, that you know who's going to be working on them. And I would be very concerned if it was parent, 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 always in that column. This is an individual learning plan to give access to the curriculum. And so it should be the personnel at school. And it may well involve you for some reinforcement at home, but it's not about a plan that you'll be doing at home. And another really important factor, there should be some indication of how long the school's going to be working on these goals and when you're going to review it. So if there aren't any dates on these things, that's something to ask for. And I've got some questions, a slide that will prompt you around that as well. So here we go with some of the questions when things aren't feeling as positive. How do you turn that around without feeling frustrated, and to keep the conversation going? So I've just put some scenarios in here. The top tip is when you reframe what you've heard as a question, ask it in a way that doesn't limit is to a yes or a no response. So you want to ask an open question. So for example, if you're hearing your child's handwriting is very slow and difficult to read, so it's just a complaint about what they can't do, you can ask, what are the alternatives to handwriting? When could we use these? So sometimes writing, the task isn't about whether your child can do the handwriting, depending what year of school they're in as well. It's actually about recording their response. So maybe for some kids, they can record their response using technology. It might be about combining pictures together, or they might need a scaffold where the start of the sentence has been written for them and they just complete the sentence. So opening it up, well, what are the alternatives? When could we use them? Something else you might hear is they can't keep up with the pace. It's just too, this lesson, it's just we need to go at a much faster pace. So your question is, what strategies would help my child keep up with the pace? So what is it? And, that might be, maybe they don't need as much information. Maybe they need some more specific goals about what they need to focus on so they can focus on some of the learning, but not all of the learning or to the same depth as the class. But we don't want the pace to exclude them from the same activity as everybody else. Assignments are always late or not submitted. So again, the question would be, well, what structure or support do you think would help my child complete the assignments on time? You might even want to ask, how many steps are there in completing an assignment? Some of the high school assignments that I see are over a time frame of 6-7 weeks, and there are multiple parts to them. So is that the barrier that's preventing your child from submitting their assignment? And then here's the one I think we've already touched on today. The year level content is too hard for them to understand. So you might feel you're being steered towards content from a lower year level. So again, you can go back with the question, what are the key facts or the important skills that the class are going to learn? And I've highlighted the word learn because it's very different from what the class are going to do. So you want to know what they're going to learn. And I think that's really when we're talking about access to the same curriculum as your peers, that's the conversation you want to have with your teachers. What is the class learning? So what's important for them to learn? And what are some of the different ways that my child could also learn that? So again, all these reframing questions is about turning a negative point into a point for discussion. It's about identifying barriers in the environment. And if any of you have heard about universal design for learning, that is a key principle around that's part of universal design for learning. But don't feel bogged down in that. I just put a little reference in there to remind me to share that with you. If the goals that you're coming up with and the strategies, the adjustments for support aren't making much sense to you, then maybe these questions can really help clarify. And I think the point that I want to make with this slide as well is that ILPs will look different, as I mentioned before, depending what sector you're in, even in between different schools. Don't worry so much about what the template looks like. But a good ILP should be able to answer these questions. It should be able to identify what your child needs to learn. It should identify clearly what the strategies will be. It should identify who is going to be responsible for delivering that, when you hope to see achievement by, and how you'll know if your child has succeeded. Now, those last two questions, the when and the how, I think are essential if you want this plan to be dynamic, something that you want to see teachers putting into practice, gathering evidence of how often your child is able to independently stay on task for 10 minutes, and then a time when you come back together. You know what that looks like, and then a time when you come back together and you review that data and say, okay, I can see that they've actually nailed this goal. We'll just continue with those supports, and we will focus on something new to develop. Often you'll hear about using SMART goals for developing an IEP, short, measurable, achievable, was it repeatable? I can't even remember what the acronym stands for. Personally, for me, I think if we get too bogged down in trying to write a goal that's a SMART goal, the emphasis shifts away from what your child needs to learn and the supports that are going to be put in place, and risks creating something other, a goal that's other than providing access to the curriculum. That might be more of a teacher point than a parent point. I don't know, but I find these questions, if your ILP can give you the answer to these questions, then you're on track. So if things aren't making sense to you, go back with that question. Well, what is it that my child actually needs to learn to do? Well, what are the strategies that the teacher is going to use to help my child be able to write independently for X amount of minutes? So those questions I think are really, really important. And as we said before, it must be about describing strategies that will support access to the curriculum. It is not a separate curriculum. Okay, so I've got some examples to share with you. So I've just made up a character here, and again, I'm not saying that this is what an ILP should look like, but you'll see that those questions in that previous slide are answered in this example. So this is Jim, who has a passion for American sitcoms. He can name all of the actors and has memorized many of the lines. It actually sounds like my husband and Seinfeld. He has auditory processing. So we started with the positive. He has auditory processing difficulties, which means Jim will take longer to understand information or sometimes misinformation altogether. And this can make him anxious and he'll ask for help continually. So if we start with the barrier, when Jim is in the classroom and with his auditory processing difficulties and his anxiety, what's the barrier for him? It's not his auditory processing, it's verbal instructions. Verbal instructions are a barrier for him to get the information, process it, and know what to do with it. So what are the adjustments? What are the strategies we're going to put in place to remove that barrier and support Jim to process that information? So the strategies for the teachers, when giving instructions, use key points in short sentences. Use pictures or videos to complement verbal instructions, so he's able to listen and get a visual cue as well. Wait between giving each instruction. Check for understanding by asking open questions. So that's the teacher checking in with Jim by using open questions to see, has he got this? So you can see how those adjustments could be, if you're in a high school setting, that could be used by all teachers, all subjects. It's telling them what they need to do. It's not telling them what they're going to teach. That's in their program. It's telling them how they're going to give Jim access. And the teacher will get feedback from Jim at the end of each lesson. So it could be a conversation with Jim or an exit ticket. So an exit ticket is often like a mini survey, and a student can rate how they went in that lesson. So how will we know if we've removed the barrier? How will we know that Jim has been successful? So we're asking the teacher to keep a tally so that we can measure a decrease in the amount of time Jim asks for help, because that was in the information up the top. And we want to see an increase in task completion. Now, this is an opportunity for, as parents, you don't have to come up with the mechanism, but you can ask the question, well, how will we know if Jim's being successful? And what I would hope to see is there's a tally sheet that the teachers will just keep, and they might count the number of times that Jim is putting his hand up. And over time, we want to see that the number of tallies is going down. There's a record at the end of the lesson that the task is completed, or 50% completed. And we collate that data so that by the end of the term, the by when, we can have a look at that and see, yeah, have we been able to remove the barrier of the verbal instruction? And we also want to see that Jim will feel less anxious. So that's why it's important that the teacher talks to Jim at the end of the lesson. Now, in this particular example, there's not a goal yet for Jim, because the conversation has focused on, well, what's the barrier and how do we remove it? So then I thought, well, oh, sorry. Now, why is that? Oh, here we go. So what is it? Then we can talk about, well, what is it that Jim actually needs to learn? Because so often with ILPs, I feel that things are being done to the students or for the students, but this is about their learning. And what does Jim need to learn? So Jim needs to learn that he can follow and carry out instructions independently. So he needs to start to build some confidence that you can do it because the strategies we've put in place will help you. And then I thought, well, what else could a goal be for Jim? Well, do you know, what else would it be important for Jim to learn? I think it's really important for Jim to learn. He has auditory processing difficulties. That's part of who he is. He needs to feel confident that he can talk to his teachers about the adjustments that work for him. And that is a strategy that he can then take year to year in school, and then when he goes into the workplace. And I think it would have been very hard to have come up with that goal at the beginning. That's when I was saying about the SMART goals can suddenly take us off on a tangent. The conversation in this example started with the barrier, removing the barrier, and then thinking, well, what's important that Jim learns from this? So the next example I've got is Edith. Edith is very sociable, and she likes to be involved in group activities with her classmates. She can concentrate for up to 10 minutes on the things that she enjoys. Edith has a mild intellectual disability and a language delay, which means it can take her longer to learn new information and to write sentences. Now, I've put a goal in here for Edith straight away because I'm thinking, well, what is it that Edith needs to learn? Edith needs to learn that she can follow a 3-step schedule to independently complete a task. That's the goal for her. And that can be measured. We know what that's going to look like. We're looking to measure her independence, and the support is about putting in 3 steps. So let's see what that looks like in the plan. Barriers for Edith that makes it hard for her to concentrate for 10 minutes or longer is the pace of the lesson and the volume of the information that's provided. It's not the fact that Edith has an intellectual disability. Tasks that have multiple steps are also a barrier for Edith. So what are the strategies or what are the adjustments that we can remove those barriers and support Edith to achieve that goal of independently working on a task? The first thing that I would encourage teachers to do, and this is where, it's the teacher talk coming in again, prioritize essential learning from the class program. And what that means is I would encourage teachers to look at their program and talk about what is it that all students are going to learn? What are the big ideas of this lesson? What are the essential facts or the essential skills that the class needs to learn as part of this lesson? And then let's say, well, okay, so what's the non-negotiable? What must everybody, including Edith, grasp from this lesson? So what that does is that firmly places Edith in the curriculum, but it's saying we know things are going to take her longer, so we need to prioritize the content for her. Then the teacher is going to break the task into 3 distinct steps and might use the prompts first, next, then. And it's also important when you introduce a new strategy, we have to teach the kids how to use that strategy. And I often talk about setting them up for success. So we know Edith can concentrate for 10 minutes on something she enjoys. Let's set up a task that's got 3 clear steps and let's make it less than 10 minutes to increase our chances to reward her at the end for doing a great job. We'll also introduce that schedule with a high level of support initially, which might mean that the teacher, a teacher's aide, or a peer might help her with all 3 steps. And then gradually you want to withdraw that support so that the teacher might help her with step 1 and step 2, but the expectation is she does step 3 on her own. Then the teacher helps her with step 1, with the expectation she does step 2 and 3 on her own, and eventually she can follow all 3 steps independently. And keep a record of what that looks like. So how much support she received for each lesson. It's not a feeling, a sense of, oh yeah, she did that quite well on her own. We want to know, and sometimes it can just be the teacher can write a little note, 1, 2, 3, or just have the numbers 1, 2, 3 and circle the numbers where she received the support. And then you can tally that up over time. The length of the task. So again, it might just be monitoring how long she took on the task and jotting that down on her piece of work. We also want to see that this strategy of structuring how to complete a task is also impacting on her learning. So are we seeing that she's becoming more successful in achieving against the achievement standards or the class program? And I think, this is why I say you're the expert, but you don't have to have all of the answers. As a parent, you shouldn't be expected to list all of the strategies unless you have some that that work at home. And this was one of those examples that I thought as a parent, you might say, oh, actually, we can do tasks, 3-step tasks at home to support the first, next, then. But you want to see it happening in the classroom as well. That question around what will my child learn? What are the barriers? What are the strategies? How will we know when they've been successful and when? All overlay this plan here. If it's not clear to you, or if you feel as if the goals, if I just go back a couple of slides, are like Mark here. Mark will improve his communication skills. If the goal seems too vague, and there's no way for you to sort of see how he's going, how you're going to measure success, that's when you can ask those questions. Or going back another slide, if, let's look at this example down the bottom, the year level content's too hard for them to understand, so we're going to program from content or achievement standards 3 years below. That's an opportunity for you to, if your vision is your child is going to be accessing the same learning, this is your opportunity to reframe that and say, well, what is the class going to be learning? And what are the different ways my child could learn that too? Okay, so I would, in both of these examples, I would still see this as information that's in an ILP. Yeah. So it describes the adjustments only. It doesn't describe what your child is learning from the curriculum. So if it's around maths and Friends of 10, that should be in the teacher's whole class teaching and learning program, not something separate. Yeah. All this is doing is saying how Edith is going to go about it, because we know if the lesson is too fast and there's too much information, she's going to get lost and not do any work. And it is tricky. And you'll see it in the next slide that I'm coming up to. Not all teachers feel confident in these strategies themselves. And that's okay. What we need to do is, if they're not confident, is we find where do we need to put the support in so they can be. All right, so, and then these are just some other questions that you can ask for at the ILP meeting. When can I expect a copy of the draft ILP? And I emphasize the word draft because that meeting will go very fast and you don't want to be forced into signing anything or agreeing anything that you don't yet feel comfortable with. It's really, really hard to write a good ILP in a meeting that's collaborative and that there's lots of documentation as well. So I would ask for a draft that you have time to go over and just check it all makes sense. Go over those questions that we, does it show me what my child's going to learn? Does it show me what learning will look like and how we're going to measure it? Who can I contact after the meeting to talk about the ILP? You may already have that rapport with your school, but this is, I said that an ILP is not a one-step process. This is really a really important link in keeping conversations about the ILP going. It doesn't have to be a formal meeting, but who's that informal contact that you can chat with, that you feel comfortable talking with? Who will talk to my child about my ILP? So once we've put all of this work into this fabulous ILP, at what point does your child know what's been planned for them? Again, it can help them be successful if they know what the goal is that they're working towards. So that's an important step. Who else needs to receive copies of the ILP? So there may be people who couldn't attend the meeting. If we're talking about a high school scenario, you won't have all of the class teachers at the ILP meeting. They all need a copy. And there may be people external to school as well. What date will the review meeting be for the ILP? I really, really encourage you to ask for that date at the meeting, because otherwise time will get away from you, and then the review may not happen at an ideal time. Typically, ILP meetings will be held once or twice a year, ideally twice, so that you can plan at the start of the year and then think about transition at the end of the year. But there have to be conversations in between time so that you know you're moving in the right direction. It's too late to wait to the end of the year. What is the best way for us to communicate in the meantime? So I would talk to the school about this. Sometimes primary schools, it's easier to set up that informal conversation. You can sort of hover outside the classroom door, or you could pre-COVID. High schools, they might have a preferred way of talking to parents. Is it by phone call, email? Do you have a communication book? Or again, do you have a good rapport with a member of staff that you can just drop in? But please ask it, because that's going to be a really positive way for you to continue a conversation about the ILP. And then the final step is putting it all into practice. So Fred here finds filing cabinets a strangely fulfilling part of his job. Thank goodness we're finally done with the IEP. Now we can file it and do what we really want. And sadly, that is the reality in many cases. So to keep that ILP dynamic, everyone who's involved with your child needs to know what their role is in that ILP. This includes your child, all of your child's teachers, therapists, and any other support agencies outside of school. Here's the point I made before. Not every teacher is going to feel confident or know how to put the strategies into practice. That's okay. What they need is additional support or training that can be made available from the school, the regional office or diocese, or by working with a consultant. So that's some of the work that I do as well, is working with teachers to support inclusion. So sometimes even sharing that expectation at a meeting. I know we're not all going to have the answers today. I know we may not all have the skills or strategies, but get the plan, trust each other, work it out together. And sometimes the plan is about identifying what the teachers need as much as what your child needs. And then finally, stay connected with the school with those informal catch-ups. Positive relationships and good communication are key. I'm really over time, but I'll just go, this is the last slide. And then if things aren't working, if communication breaks down, and I know that it does, you can use the ILP to help remove the emotion and guide a conversation that focuses on the agreed strategies. So you can go back to the paperwork. Look, we agreed that this adjustment and that adjustment were going to happen. Have we made any progress? How do you know? And then if you get an airy-fairy answer, well, how do you know there's progress? Can I see the data? Can I see the tally sheets? Can I see samples of work? If there's no progress, do you think we need to change the strategy? Or do we need to support the teacher to implement the strategy? And, you know, again, offer the olive branch. How can we work together? Look, I've got some great strategies that I use at home. Maybe you could use these at school. But the plan, if it's well written, can really help you have those conversations and remove some of that emotion, so you're just focused on what was agreed at that meeting. And in this last slide, I've just put in some extra resources for you about looking at it in action. There's some older CARA resources there of students accessing the same learning as their peers, but going about it in different ways. So those are videos. I've got some information blogs there. And then, of course, there's the legal support for you in terms of your rights and the rights of your child under the disability standards. And that's it. I knew it was going to get a bit rapid at the end, but think about it as a process. That meeting is only one step in the process. You're the expert. You don't have to have all the answers. Your teachers won't necessarily have all the skills. We can get the support that your teachers need to develop those skills and support your child.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was fantastic. I just, again, wish I just had this information when our son started. I think what's really hard for some families is when the school just isn't willing to probably listen. They've got their own agenda. So having those sort of reframing questions is really helpful.
Maybe going back with those what, why, how, when questions. You know, looking at the plan that you've shared, it's not clear to me what my child will be learning, or can we have a conversation that where we talk together about what my child will be learning or needs to learn, and that's in terms of them being a learner, not the curriculum. What are the strategies that the teachers are going to use to support? Because that's not clear at the moment in the plan that you've shared with me. Maybe that could be part of your vision or your medium-term goal when you go to those meetings, is that as a family, your expectation is that your child will be learning from the same curriculum alongside their peers. You understand that there might be some challenges in how they do that. That's what you want to be discussing at the face-to-face meeting. Setting your expectation at the very beginning, and you have the right for that. So does your child. So it might be good to actually state that at the start of the meeting or ahead of the meeting, so that they know that this is your non-negotiable.